Here on this podcast, we've talked about guns a lot. We've talked about politics a lot, but mostly we usually talk about some kind of intersection of the two, gun politics. And today's guest is going to be someone who has a lot of insight into that. Welcome back to another episode of T-Rex Talk. I want to welcome my guest for this particular episode, John Crump. You've been a journalist and advocate for firearms rights for some time now. How long have you been doing this? It feels like as long as I've been paying attention, you've been publishing articles about this stuff.
About a decade, so about 10 years.
Yeah. So technically, I theoretically have been paying attention longer than that, but practically, I guess not. So I can think of your articles covering stuff happening in the legislative area, the legal area, all kinds of areas around gun rights. But I would love to talk to you today about how things have changed while you've been covering this area over the last 10 years. But I suppose we should talk about the big news of the week first. By the time people watch this, it'll be last week's news. But the Hearing Protection Act passed the House. Not technically law yet till it gets out of the Senate. But did you see that coming?
Yeah, I kind of figured that they were going to do it through reconciliation because the NFA is primarily a tax according to the Supreme Court. Yeah. Therefore, it can be modified through the reconciliation process because you only need a 50 vote in the Senate to get that through. And most of the times that the HPA died was because they were trying to pass it on its own when you needed a supermajority. And they just didn't feel like wasting the time because they knew it was going to go to the Senate and die. But this time around, they did it through reconciliation, which is a smart play. And there's a lot of people smarter than I that have been pushing for that for a while. So when I heard back in January, that was the play, I got really, really excited.
Yeah. Now, there was a moment a couple of weeks ago where part of what we wanted made it in. There was a compromise version of the bill that lowered the $200 tax stamp to $0, but it kept all the fingerprinting. It kept the NFA registry in the hands of the ATF. It kept all the penalties, so you could now go to jail for 10 years for doing a $0 tax wrong, which is even more ludicrous than 10 years in prison for getting a $200 tax wrong. So the thing that I was surprised by, because the Hearing Protection Act has been kicking around DC for a while. The thing that I was surprised by was the level of pushback from regular gun owners on the internet, the number of calls to the switchboard. There seemed to be a lot more educated gun owners that understood the ramifications of the NFA registry and all those sorts of things than I expected. There seemed to be a lot more people calling out for the entirety of the Hearing Protection Act than I expected.
Yeah, the Hearing Protection Act first was introduced in 2015, and that was like a pipe dream back then. The difference between 2015 and now is gun owners are more engaged in the political process than ever before. And there's a lot of gun owners. So that is a huge voting block. Before, gun owners would, stay in their own lane. They wouldn't challenge the political establishment. And I think Republicans took gun owners for granted, thinking that they're always going to vote for us. And that has changed. With the Hearing Protection Act in particular, I've never seen a groundswell of momentum from gun owners to actually get politically involved. The phone lines in DC actually went down because of the amount of calls.
Yeah. And the fascinating thing to me is, like, in the grand scheme of things, like, in some ways, the budget bill is sort of boring because it's an annual budget. Congress has to pass it every year, so it just kind of happens. But on the other hand, the Hearing Protection Act is a very tiny amount of that bill. It might be the smallest part of that bill because we're talking about billions and trillions of dollars worth of cuts and spending. And the Hearing Protection Act theoretically cuts $10 million worth of ATF tax collection. So in some ways, it's the smallest part of the budget bill, and it was the most commented on the most controversial, the most attention attracting part of the bill in our part of the world. And yeah, it felt like a very different situation than 10 years ago or even 5 years ago.
Well, I think one of the things is that Republicans have control of the House, the
Mm,
Senate, and the White House. That usually doesn't happen. And when it does happen, it's only usually for about 2 years. I looked through like all the administrations going back to the 60s, and usually a party has control of the House, the Senate, and the White House only for 2 years at a time. And you don't get that back for another like 8 years. So gun owners know that and they took advantage of it because if we don't get it this time, we're probably not going to be able to get it
yeah.
through the other time.
Yeah. But it does seem like not only is there more political engagement, um, let me know if you feel this as well. It feels like there's more general education in the gun crowd as well. Like I made a video about suppressors about 5 years ago, I think it was. Everything you're not supposed to know about suppressors. And kind of my whole idea was like, this is stuff that people don't know about suppressors. Well, that video, I would not make that video today because it feels like today everybody knows all that stuff about suppressors. It seems like there's been a major shift in the way that people just talk about not just suppressors, but suppressors and short barreled rifles and the way that the registry works and some of the ways that the system is misused and some of the ways that the NFA was passed. Like this is no longer esoteric knowledge. This seems to be stuff that like your average people who call their senators and their congressmen on the phone just know this stuff. And guys like Thomas Massey and Andrew Clyde, they just know this stuff. It no longer feels like something that only weird silencer nerds are aware of.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. I think that is because of a few different reasons. One, there are organizations out there that have been doing a great job of putting out the message. Gun Owners of America, for example, and
Yeah.
for silencers specifically, you have the American Suppressor Association. That's been really doing a public awareness campaign over the past few years to teach people that suppressors aren't tools of assassins and they're not illegal. You can own one. Then you have all the YouTubers out there that have been
Yeah.
making videos about it and the actual suppressor companies themselves. So the awareness is there.
Yeah. I do think, yeah, YouTube is an excellent example. I think we should especially thank YouTube. I mean, even Google itself, I feel like they have made YouTube, even though there's a lot of ironically enough, suppression of suppressor content on YouTube. They took down some forgotten weapons videos that show him attaching an ancient suppressor to an ancient gun, like stuff that is in no way a threat, even to the most extreme political viewpoints at YouTube. Um, I feel like they have done exactly the worst things. Like they've allowed the interesting channels that have interesting esoteric suppressor knowledge to perform well because that's how the algorithm works. But then they've also brought a lot of attention to this area by doing things like taking down a bunch of harmless forgotten weapons videos about suppressors and then later putting them back up and apologizing. I think YouTube and Google have accidentally really pushed this. Um, Made people more interested in suppressors, made people more interested in this issue. So, as annoying as YouTube is to deal with a lot of times, maybe we should just say thanks, YouTube, for bringing so much attention to this area.
Yeah, it's definitely the Streisand effect. It's like if you put a big red button up that says "Do not push," someone's going to push that button. Probably more
Hmm.
likely to push that button if it has a sign that says "Do not push" than to have a sign that does nothing. Because
Hmm.
people are curious. Why don't they want me to push that? And they push it. Just like with the Streisand effect with Barbara Streisand's house.
Yeah.
She didn't want pictures of her house online, but when she tried to block people from putting pictures of her house online, it actually
Front page
proliferated
news.
pictures.
Yeah. Everybody was talking about it. The hilarious thing to me is, uh, first of all, when that happens, when that happens, and YouTube or whoever, in the interests of controlling the narrative, actually bring attention to it and put some more light on it. In many ways, I feel like they did this with Alex Jones. Alex Jones was never better known than when he got kicked off of all the big platforms at the same time. Now, part of that was he had already built an alternative platform to go to, but if he had been kicked off of YouTube and then a month later he'd been kicked off of iTunes, then a month later he'd been kicked off of Facebook, he might not have become the household name that he did when it immediately happened. So that stuff is always kind of interesting to watch. But in some ways, I feel like what we're seeing with the trend, the firearm owners getting more involved politically, getting more knowledgeable, that's not a trend-driven thing. It is a slow, organic, growing groundswell where, yes, there'll be a YouTube video here or an active notoriety there that shows somebody this, but the people who I talked to about this issue, the people that we heard about second, third hand from staffers in Congress. This isn't just a flash in the pan thing. These are folks who have been following this issue and care deeply about this issue very deeply.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. One of the biggest things that help gun owners get involved is the making of new gun owners. And one of the biggest things that caused that was COVID, when everyone tried to go out and get a gun in California because they thought you can walk in and just buy a gun. And then they realized, wait, this isn't like what I was told it was like.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. So what do you see happening over the next little while? Because suppressors were this weird niche item, and now they have kind of become a rallying cry for some of the most egregious and pointless bits of ancient 90-year-old gun law. What do you think happens next? We do have this window for the next year and a half of the House, the Senate, and the presidency all being Republican. What do you think happens next with gun owners, with gun control, just over the next little bit? What do you sense?
What I sense is, let's talk about the HPA right now. Section 2 of the HPA got passed. There is another section, Section 3, that can be added back in, and that would prevent states from infringing on your rights to own
Right.
suppressor.
Yeah.
And I think that might be going back in. It seems like in the Senate, there is a more of an appetite to put back in the SHORT Act, which would remove short-barreled rifles and short-barreled shotguns from the NFA. I could see that going back in. Can't guarantee it. I don't feel as strongly about that going back in as suppressors being removed from the NFA, but I can definitely see that happening. But if you look at the way things are moving, let's go back 30 years to 1995. 1995, we had magazine limitations nationwide. We had an assault weapons ban. We had most states being may issue or no issue. Now every state is shall issue. Most states are constitutional carry states. There's no magazine restrictions on the federal level, no assault weapons banned on the federal level. So things are getting better, and we are getting more and more of our rights back every single year. You go back and you look like 2008 with the Heller decision in the courts, and then you have the Bruin decision. So we keep on getting more and more rights back. What the anti side likes to do is they want to see us discouraged. So they play up, oh, we had this victory, we had this victory, we had this victory. When they'll win a battle here or there, but they're losing the war. And as gun owners, we have to remember that we are winning more than we are losing, and keep involved, because it's our actions, it's our engagement that is keeping us on the winning side.
Yes. Yeah, and a lot of this stuff, like I talked about that happening at the state level, because in Tennessee we definitely felt that this year, the legislative session in Tennessee, we got one pro-gun bill passed, and a number of pro-gun bills did not pass. And we had some not so good bills pass. They were not super egregious like bans. They were not, magazine capacity limitations. They were nothing like we see in Colorado, Illinois, New York, California. But there were definitely some and Tennessee is a weird case because we have a bunch of cleanup, housekeeping stuff that needs to happen after our permitless carry bill passed a few years ago. There's definitely gray areas in the code that need cleaning up. And there were more gun control advocates, lobbyists for gun control registered in the state of Tennessee this past year than any other time that anyone on the Hill can remember. And they definitely were advocating for some of these small bills, which are not a big deal, but they're sort of a death by 1,000 cuts thing. And it is very demoralizing when there's like 8 or 9 restrictions on where you can carry guns or how you can carry guns that pass, and only one expansion of gun rights that passes. But it feels kind of petty. Like these restrictions are small and they're not going to affect the majority of gun owners. They're just going to be something that hurts a few gun owners. But it is a demoralizing thing. It is a discouraging thing.
Yeah, that is true. But you got to remember, every infringement will expand. So you got to look at the totality of the infringements. They might get a bunch of small infringements through, and that could add up to a larger infringement in the future. But we also have the court systems to fight back, and there's a lot of court cases going through. And I think that the Colorado ban, I'm pretty sure like even the ninth is going to overturn that.
It's so ridiculously extreme and overreaching that, I think that fails in court. I completely agree with you. There will be a bunch of attempts to discourage the gun owners, but the gun owners have time and momentum and the Constitution and public opinion and just the general direction of education and interest on our side. So I think that is an important thing to remember.
Yeah, and with the whole USAID thing, all that money being pulled, they're getting less and less money. And all the anti-government grants that got stopped. I mean, not anti-government, or anti-gun grants that got stopped recently.
Yeah.
I think that is a good thing. And you're seeing a shift in places where I never thought I would see a shift. Like at the ATF, I never thought I would see a shift there. But they're actually starting to reform a lot of their policy. I talked to ATF leadership a lot, which last year you said you'll be talking to ATF leadership. I would have laughed because a couple years ago when I went to SHOT, when I walked in to the booth, they said, we're not allowed to talk to you.
Oh, that's fascinating. So they do talk to me, but I'm very nervous every time I go up to talk to them. And then this last SHOT Show, I just published a bunch of videos about the ATF that are, shall we say, pretty non-complimentary. And so when I went up to talk to them this year, I was a little more nervous than previous years. But we have new leadership. And it does feel like if you wanted to be really picky, you could definitely point out some Trump appointments that they don't look like the best appointments. You're not seeing necessarily quite as much movement as we were promised, but we do have some pretty big sea changes in some of the DOJ agencies, more so than any Republican president I can remember. I'm very used to Republican presidents getting appointed, and then they put in people who look exactly like who their opponent would have put in if they had been elected. So this is a very interesting situation with the ATF.
Yeah, it's definitely very interesting. In Trump's first term, he said the war on the Second Amendment was over. And then he said, take the guns first and then ban bump stocks.
Yeah.
But this term seems to be different. I think his advisors are different than who we had in the first term. And I think that makes a huge, huge difference. And you're seeing a lot of positive stuff coming out of DC, especially around guns, especially out of the DOJ. one of the biggest issues at the ATF was their lead attorney, a woman named Pamela Hicks, who was 100% anti-gun, hated
Yeah.
guns. And she was replaced by a guy named Leiter, and Leiter taught Second Amendment rights at George Mason University. So that was a huge change right there. Marvin Richardson gone. They got rid of a lot of really anti-gun people. Eric Epstein was another attorney over there that was
Right. Yeah.
terrible, and he did a lot of bad stuff, and he's gone now too.
Yeah, I think that is sort of the big difference. Like, it's easy to point at some very high level appointments because this happens every time you get a new president. The very high level appointments, the super political people, get swapped out because that's the thing that you have to do. But cleaning house and getting rid of some of the lawyers that have been running these departments for years, people like Marvin, who has been in the ATF for forever, like the fact that he was escorted out or ushered out or gently encouraged to leave. I don't know the exact circumstances, whether security marched him out or not, but that says a lot. That says a lot more than just a political appointment at the top for the purpose of rewarding a campaign donor or demonstrating some level of, lip service. Actually picking off some of the lower level folks that have established policies that go against what you've promised feels like it is about a lot more commitment.
Yeah. I found out about Marvin the night before he found out about it. And when I was told about it, I was like, can I release an article about it or go live on my YouTube channel about it? And they're
Wow.
like, well, he doesn't know yet. I was like, I'm not going to tell you not to do it, but he does not know. So I was like,
Oh man.
yeah, let me wait until they tell him. I don't want him to find out, that way. But
Yeah.
he came in and they said, you have two choices. You can resign, or by the end of the day, you're going to be fired. And he took the resignation, packed up his stuff, and left the office. He had to
Okay.
know it.
Yeah. Well, see, this is kind of an example. This is one of the differences between a Donald Trump presidency and some other Republican presidencies where guys, my dad was somewhat involved with the Reagan administration, and Reagan did not get a lot of his guys in. And then the Bush administration was a much more, like an even more mainstream Republican administration. And then George W. Bush, in some ways, even more mainstream GOP. And so there's a lot of putting people in and out at the top, but there's a huge amount of just leaving people who are career bureaucrats that definitely have a specific party bent, leaving those guys in at the middle. No change to there's some directive changes that come down to those guys, but they just stay throughout a number of Republican administrations. So, yeah, there's a very definite feel when guys like Marvin Richardson are swapped out and not just the people who talk to Congress and the people who talk to the press.
Yeah, Marvin Richardson was in there for over 20 years. Epstein was in there for over 30 years. And to remember something about Marvin is that he was the main driving force behind the regulations on pistol braces and frames and receivers. That was his baby.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm looking forwards to. Now, I will tell you, I don't have super high hopes for the ATF.
Neither do
The
I.
way that it was formed, all the laws that they have to work with, like there's not much that is salvageable within the ATF, even if you put in the best possible people. It's the fruit of the poisonous tree, to mix a legal metaphor. So that's my opinion. I'm not quiet about that opinion, but yeah, I'm really curious to see what the next few years looks like, and kind of what the future holds. So obviously, you've been covering this for some time as journalist. You're also an advocate. But what would you like to see? What is your best case scenario for this? What would you like to see happen over the next 4 years that sets us up for, as the president would say, continued winning, so much winning?
Yeah. Okay, I would like to see the ATF abolished, but before we abolish it, we have to do a few different things because let's say
Yeah.
we abolish the ATF tomorrow, their power is going to go to somewhere else. So the first thing you need to do is you need to defund the ATF. That will stop them from taking enforcement actions. Then you want to defang the ATF, which means taking away all their power and just putting it on the ether. So, just eliminating their power.
Hmm.
And then after that, and that's when you abolish the ATF. So it has to be like a three-step process for the ATF. I hope to see that happen. I'm not too
Yeah.
confident that it will happen, but that would be my pipe dream, basically,
Yeah.
to see that happen. But I would like to see mostly the thing I would like to see mostly is the Supreme Court finally taking up the issue of so-called assault weapons and magazine capacity, whether that
Yeah.
is the Snopes case, which is up for review. It was supposed to go to conference today, but it's supposed to go to conference like every Friday, and it's always
Yeah.
pushed down the road. So we'll have to see about that. I would like to see them take up a case. I'm not sure if Snopes is going to be the one they're going to take up, but I got a theory on why they keep on delaying it. I can share that if you like.
I mean, if I don't know how, to be honest, I'll be brutally honest with you. I have no idea how popular this podcast is. Like, I know how many people watch it on YouTube. I know roughly how many people watch it on Spotify, sort of, but Spotify's analytics are broken. I also don't pay attention to podcasts. So this is a public podcast that some people watch. If you would love to share a theory with our audience of an unknown size and an unknown reach, go for it.
Yeah, I think I don't think that the Supreme Court's going to grant certiorari to Snopes. I wish they would. That's the case in
Mm,
Maryland for assault weapons. The reason why I think it keeps on getting pushed to a different conference is I think it's going to be denied cert, but one or two of the justices, or maybe more, are writing their dissent of it not being granted cert. And I think that's what we are seeing. Don't know that for sure. If anyone tells you they know what the Supreme Court is going to do, they have no idea what they're talking about because no one knows what the Supreme Court's going to do unless it gets
yeah.
leaked, like in Dobbs. But other than
Right.
that, no one really knows what they're going to do. But that's just a theory.
Yeah, and my assumption is Dobbs was a very interesting case. If it's not getting leaked, then it's probably not going to be it's not going to be the best decision because it seems like the leakers want to leak the horrifyingly right wing stuff to rile people up. It's been a long time since anyone leaked a left leaning decision that was coming down. I'm trying to think the last time that was, but yeah, it would be great to have the Supreme Court weigh in on some of this stuff. But at the same time, we have some pretty good Supreme Court rulings that are pretty clear, like Bruin, and they don't always pick up the cases that I feel like fall directly into Bruin territory and directly contravene the precedent of Bruin. So I don't know how much of that is the makeup of the Supreme Court right now, the stuff that they're prioritizing, or just the fact that they have already handed down a very clear precedent and they're just sending things back to these lower courts that are defying them. I just don't know because I don't. Not only does nobody not know what the Supreme Court does, I also don't know always how the Supreme Court is supposed to work, let alone what it's thinking at the time.
Yeah. I think that they're going to take an assault weapons case. I don't think they found the one that they want to take yet, but
Hmm.
eventually they're going to have to take it. If we get a circuit split somewhere, that will make it more likely that they take an assault weapons case. But I think that we will see one.
Yeah,
Probably
interesting.
within the next 10 years, probably sooner. I think probably in the next 5 years. I
Hmm.
just don't know if I hope it's Snopes, but I just don't know. And by them delaying that in Ocean State and these other cases, I think it doesn't really bode well for them taking it.
Hmm. What about the Vanderstock case? Because we got a ruling on Vanderstock, but the statement was only on a little part of the case, if I'm reading it correctly.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. They tried to do a facial challenge on the APA. They ruled on that. They kicked it back down to the Fifth Circuit. The Fifth Circuit kicked it back down to Judge O'Connor and the district court. Now, here's an interesting thing. This could actually give us a redo because the government has asked for a 60-day stay because they might be
right.
changing their stance on Vanderstock. And if
Hmm.
the government says, hey, we're going to enter into a consent decree or we're not going to contest a summary judgment, then we win. And it looks like the government might actually be considering doing that, which is
Yeah.
exciting.
It's a very weird situation. I mean, it's not weird because it happens every 4 to 8 years, but the government will have cases and opinions. And then partway through the process of that thing, there will be a new president and there will be a new attorney general and there will be new directives to the DOJ. And that case that's partway through, the government may have changed its position on 3D printed firearms or ghost guns or homemade, home built stuff in the middle of a case on those things. And so now it becomes very complicated. This is what happens when you let stuff take too long. You end up with some complexities that you got to deal with.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Cases take forever, and the government does change their mind depending on who's holding that seat in the White House.
Yeah,
I
and
This time, I think we're seeing good stuff come out of it, but who knows? Maybe in 4 years we might see some bad stuff coming.
yeah, and just I would say the complexity in general is bad because I've heard different things from different people who are educated on this stuff. Unlike myself, I'm not a lawyer. None of this is legal advice. None of this is particularly well grounded. But I've talked to people who are lawyers, are offering legal advice, and have said different things like, "Oh, the government needs to throw this case out because that's the best thing for everybody involved." And then people saying, "No, no, the government needs to make sure that even though they've changed their position, they need to fight this case out in such a way that they get a ruling so that it's actually put to bed." And so the level of complexity means there's some gray area and ambiguity even in what people think would be a good outcome or a good strategy a lot of times.
Yeah, well, you got to look at what the case is challenging for
Yes,
Vanderstock.
yeah. It's case by
Vander,
case.
yeah, Vanderstock. A lot of people said, hey, I hope the government doesn't drop this and the Supreme Court rules our way. And I was like, that doesn't matter if the government drops it or the Supreme Court rules our way. It's the same result because Vanderstock was not a Second Amendment case. It was a case about the Administrative Procedures Act.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the other thing is the way that the water gets muddied sometimes. A great example of this, since we're still talking about the Hearing Protection Act, I've seen some people on social media just lambaste Thomas Massey for being pro gun control and anti gun because he voted against this gigantic budget bill. Um, and if I remember correctly, because it was, last week, Thomas Massey was extremely outspoken about putting the entirety of the Hearing Protection Act into this budget bill, even though he didn't support the spending in the budget bill. So, yeah, the situation is complicated, and people who don't understand it have comments.
Yeah, a lot of people think that the reconciliation bill was just about the Hearing Protection Act.
Right.
Thomas Massey had an issue with the SALT portion of it. SALT is state
Yeah.
and local taxes. The discount you get if you're in a high tax state. That was his issue. I don't think he had any issue with the HVA portion of it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I know that he had an issue with the compromise that David Kustoff
Yeah.
from Tennessee was involved in. But yeah, Thomas Massey I have never heard him say anything about guns that I disagreed with. In fact, it's been great to watch him debate people on the floor and say stuff that I know that only hardcore gun nerds know, which now, thanks to YouTube, is like millions of us.
Yeah, Thomas Massey is 100% pro Second Amendment. 100%. Like, it's not an act. He's not doing it to get votes. He loves guns. If you got to remember the Christmas card he did a couple years ago.
Yes. Yes. Leftists were outraged that he would post a picture of his family holding firearms on a Christmas card. And yeah, people who just before had been complaining about how Christmas is not a thing that politicians should ever talk about because of the separation of church and state were horrified that the sanctity of Christmas would be tainted by firearms. Yeah, it was a lot of pearl clutching. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fake outrage.
It's an interesting situation. But yeah, I do. It does bug me that both the legal process, but also the legislative process is so complicated that it is very hard to figure out what is actually being accomplished, what is actually being argued for. This level of confusion and opacity, I think, is bad for the conversation, not to mention the actual legislation and the actual application of these things.
Absolutely, absolutely. I just want to say one more thing about the Hearing Protection Act and why I think it will go through in the Senate is the committee that has to approve it is their tax committee, and that is ran by Senator Crapo, who happens to be the sponsor of the Hearing Protection Act in the Senate.
That's going to help. Yeah. So I talked to a couple of senators last week, and they were very happy with the direction that the Hearing Protection Act was going, and they were unhappy by the compromise that has since been reversed. So I'm optimistic about that. A little bit less optimistic about the short act, but we'll see. There's a lot of we don't know the exact timing that it will actually come to a vote, but I think that now is a great time for people to talk to their own senators and the folks in that committee. Ideally, your senators are in that committee so that you can talk to them about what happens in that committee and directly as constituents. But yeah, now's a good time to put some pressure on. I think, because I've heard a lot of people say, A, nothing ever happens, and B, we never get listened to. But I think the Hearing Protection Act is a great example of people listening to passionate voices about Second Amendment issues.
Yeah, I think that we're going to get it through the Senate by the end of June. I know the goal is to get it through the Senate into the president's desk before the 4th of July break, but I think it might be a little bit sooner than that. I think it's going to be by the end of June.
Yeah. Well, it'll give us something to do, as if we didn't have enough going on already. Now, one other thing about the Hearing Protection Act, what do you think the result is going to be? I think it's going to go through, and I think the president is going to sign it because it's his big, beautiful bill. He's on board with the bill. What do you think happens after that, just functionally and practically? I have a rough prediction that suppressors may be out of stock for a year or two.
Right now, if you look at this suppressor sales, I do a lot of coverage of suppressors in like the industry, the suppressor industry. These companies are producing them at record pace. And every month, they're selling a record number of suppressors.
Yes.
Now, if you remove the NFA registration portion of it, and you can just go to any gun dealer and buy it as a GCA item, they're going to go out of stock really, really, really fast. And
yeah,
I don't think they'll be able to keep up. Eventually, other players are going to come into the market because right now, because of the NFA, a lot of players are not in the market. But I believe that we're going to see other players come into the market. The prices are going to go down, and the market's going to be flooded with suppressors. Yeah. But it's going to be hard to get your hands on one for a while.
Yeah. No, I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be fun. I think that this does a bunch of things. I think that this will help the firearm industry in general. 4 years ago, went through kind of a Trump slump. There was generally lower firearm sales overall until about 2020, when it picked way back up. And I think we're going to have kind of a Trump slump again as there's less pressure, less conversation about potential bans and things like that, we might just kind of see lower overall firearm sales. But this is going to be really, really good for suppressor manufacturers. I think it was the shrinking of the wait times. The e-forms actually going quickly was massive for the suppressor manufacturing companies, but they still had a bunch of extra hoops to jump through. With the HPA going through and it just being a firearm. Technically, the GCA makes suppressors a firearm, which I think is hilarious and silly. In some ways, I hope I don't get misquoted on this. In some ways, I'm okay with that being the case for now, because I do think that if we went from suppressors being fully regulated to not regulated, every gas station in America would try to buy them, and they would just be everywhere. So, ideally, that is what we have: utterly unregulated suppressor manufacture and sales. However, this is a big enough change that, practically speaking, the fact that they're going to come through FFLs, people who already know about selling and transferring guns, will help brand new suppressor owners. That may be okay. Like, practically speaking, I actually think that is going to help matters a bit with supply and demand, and people not putting a 22 suppressor on a 300 blackout rifle and blowing it up. Like, there may be some benefit to the fact that it's going to be a little bit more of a gradual step down.
I believe that suppressors should be sold in vending machines right next to like the
exactly
and stuff like that.
Yes, 100%.
I see what you're saying about that. The reason why the Shush Act would remove it from the NFA and also GCA, the reason why that cannot be passed through reconciliation is because the GCA is not a tax, and you can't do that through reconciliation. I do think that one of the biggest places that will benefit from this is the 3D printing community. There are 3D printing suppressors, and right now when you 3D print a suppressor, you have to engrave a piece of metal, and you have to insert it when you're printing. That all goes away.
Yeah, so this is going to be fantastic for the home building community. The home building firearm community, I think, is already a vibrant and rapidly growing place. But I think this is going to be great for suppressors, because if the regular suppressor manufacturers are absolutely slammed, supply cannot keep with demand at all, but you can go out and buy a 3D printer and get some files and do a thing. Like, I think that's going to be huge. That's going to be massive, because right now there is no shortage of firearm lowers. The people who are 3D printing their own home-built guns are doing it for love of the hobby, not because they can't get their hands on stuff. Suppressors might be different. Suppressors might just absolutely blow this particular hobby section up, and it'll be super fun.
Yeah, and suppressors, they're not complicated.
Right.
Not complicated.
And people should experiment with them. Like, there's been 90 years of you're not allowed to experiment with suppressors, basically, or you can't afford to experiment with suppressors. Now you can experiment. You can try stuff. You can do wipes. You can do ablative materials. You can try different materials. You can just do stuff.
Yeah, that's going to be great.
Yeah. So
wait to start printing out suppressors.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. There's all kinds of stuff that theoretically will be opened up. But yeah, I'm with you. These should be ultimately entirely unregulated. We should totally get rid of the '68 Gun Control Act and just eradicate the whole thing. The good news is the steps that we are taking. Even that sounds like a big deal, but the steps that we are taking now make the arguments for doing that so much easier. The precedent for going in that direction is so much clearer. The number of people who are actually going to want that are just going to grow exponentially over the next few years. So, yeah, I think we're winning on this particular issue.
Yeah, I think the next big battle for suppressors, or it actually is going on now, is on the state level, because there's still a lot of states that ban suppressors. Illinois, California, Massachusetts. There's a bunch of states that ban suppressors. And there are lawsuits that have been filed, and there's going to be ones that are being filed in the future that I can't talk about right now. But
Yeah.
there's going to be more lawsuits coming in the coming months and years, and there's already a few already out there.
Yeah. It's going to be hopefully everything that happens at the national level, everything that happens inside of states that are not currently banning suppressors will give ammunition and evidence for those lawsuits. But this is something that we kind of were trying to do here in Tennessee. We had a bill that passed a few years ago now, which took short-barreled rifles off of Tennessee's prohibited weapons list, and it kind of didn't do anything because obviously the ATF and the NFA still exist, but cleaning up some of that stuff ahead of time, creating some of those footholds for potential legal challenges. A number of people told us we were wasting our time with that, but I don't know. I mean, wouldn't it have been wouldn't it be lame and terrible if the Short Act does pass in the next month or two and short-barreled rifles are technically illegal in Tennessee? How terrible would that have been? Like, it's neat that we cleaned that up ahead of time.
Well, in Florida right now, if you read the Florida law, and there's 12 states with similar laws that says SBRs are banned unless properly registered with the federal government.
Right.
So those 12 states, and Florida's one of them, they're going to have, I mean, I don't think that was the purpose of the law, and I don't think it will be enforced, but who knows? It could be.
Yeah, it's definitely better to clean that stuff up and not have it lying around. Our hope with the Tennessee bill was not so much that we would get this out of the way because an imminent Short Act was going to pass. It was get this off of the book so that we have a better 10th Amendment challenge to the NFA. We just have more footholds. We just have more opportunities to maybe put some teeth into our Firearm Freedom Acts, that kind of thing. So any bad law, any infringing code, you should just remove it. There's no you don't have to have a reason for it's going to do exactly this, or maybe someday will do exactly that. If it's bad code, it should come out. If it's unconstitutional, it should come out. If it's an infringement, it should come out because it's just going to cause problems if you leave it.
Yeah, I believe that the NFA is unconstitutional, and I think that there's a court case from the 50s that actually proves it. There's a case that went up to the Supreme Court, Garden Murdoch versus Pennsylvania. It was a Jehovah's Witness that was going door to door in Pennsylvania. They arrested him because he didn't have a solicitor's license, and the Supreme Court ruled that he was practicing his freedom of religion, and you cannot put a direct tax on a right. And yet the NFA puts a direct tax on a right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's such a fascinating thing that, in 1934, when they passed the NFA, the argument was, well, we cannot infringe on people's Second Amendment rights. We cannot take those rights away, but it's just a tax, so it's fine, which, that's how we can remove it through reconciliation in a budget bill. And that's, we have a court case saying you're not allowed to do that in the 50s. So there are so many ways in which the NFA fails constitutional scrutiny, and even later principles, I think, back that up. So, yeah, it's good that there's more people talking about this, and the needle is moving in the correct direction.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and the needle is moving in the correct direction. We got to get suppressors and short barrel rifles and shotguns off the NFA. The only reason that short barrel rifles and short barrel shotguns were on the NFA, I don't know if did you ever read the debates during the 1934?
Yes. Yeah, they were going to take pistols off, and
exactly.
Even some of the wimpiest senators were like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! My constituents, we're gonna ban all these guns because crime is absolutely out of control. My constituents don't want to have their handguns taken away from them if crime is completely out of control."
Yeah, well, they put in the short barrel rifles and short barrel shotguns because they thought pistols were going to go in, and that was them closing the loophole. But then they removed the pistols from the NFA, but they left the short barrel rifles and shotguns. So it's not 100-year-old mistake.
Yes, it is a vestigial loophole for a thing that didn't even ever come into existence. So it's crazy, and it made I mean, it made no sense then. It is a boondoggle of a bit of code, but people didn't really worry about that quite as much because rifles were a lot longer back then. Shotguns were a lot longer back then, but it's almost 100 years ago now. We have all kinds of cartridges that perform really well out of shorter barrels. And
Yeah.
I mean, I was just thinking about this today. Even the differentiation between rifle and pistol is mechanically meaningless. It is only a legal thing. Like I was looking at some ammo that I had on my desk this morning. I have 7.5, the FK 7.5 Berno round, which is an unbelievably powerful pistol round. And then I also had some, 22 long rifle. It has rifle right in the name, and it has no power compared to that 7.5 FK round that is designed technically for a pistol. You can shoot anything out of anything, and this differentiation is very, very silly.
Yeah, what they were worried about back in 1934 is that people were going to take their 1911s and stick a stock on them and call them a rifle.
Yeah. Well, that would be terrible if they did that. Like, can you imagine the madness, the chaos? It would just been unbelievable. So glad we dodged that bullet.
Yeah, they thought that's how people were going to get around the pistol ban.
My brother has a Browning high power that was made in Canada for China. You might have heard about some of these. They were made to sell to the Chinese government that was currently being overthrown by Mao, and it didn't actually. They never actually completed the order because Mao was successful. But these guns are a weird category in and of themselves because they came with the stock. It's the Browning with the stock and the rifle sights. And there's this particular carve out somewhere in ATF regulations that say that if this gun came with a stock and has rifles on it, it's not a short-barreled rifle, it's a pistol. If it has rifle sights, it's definitely not a rifle, it's definitely a pistol. And it's okay for you to put that on and it's not an SPR.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense, does it? That was when they were trying to sell them to Shanghai Shek, right?
Yes, yeah. And it just so happened that a huge pile of them never got sent to Asia, and they were imported into America to sell in the civilian market. And then somebody realized, like, oh, wait, hang on a second. There's this SBR thing. Like, this is a pistol that you literally has rifle sights on, and you clip a stock onto it. And some ATF agent at the time was like, nah, it's fine. We'll put an exclusion in there. This is obviously not what we're talking about. It's like, it couldn't be more what you're talking about.
Exactly. That was the whole entire purpose of putting it in the NFA to begin with.
Yeah. So the ATF always been inconsistent, always been pursuing unconstitutional principles as its main purpose, and should just go away. So it'll be interesting to see how this actually plays out, if it is possible, and how it actually transpires that stuff gets unwound, if it does get unwound.
Yeah. Hopefully the ATF is on their deathbed, but who knows? Who knows?
It's the ATF has been called out for absolutely ridiculously terrible behavior many times in their history and survived. So it'll be interesting to watch what happens in the future. But one thing that I know for sure is you will be covering it because you keep a really close eye on this stuff.
Yeah, everywhere.
Yeah, I was going to say, where would you like listeners of the podcast to follow you? Because you are published in a lot of different places. What's the best way for them to keep up with your coverage of stuff?
Yeah, I have two main places. Ammoland.com is where all my written articles go. And on YouTube, I have John Crump News, where I do videos.
Yeah. It's good stuff. There's, as we've talked about throughout the episode, this is a complicated field. It's way more complicated than it should be. But gun people have done a really good job of learning a lot of complicated trivia about suppressors and legislation of the past. So I do think that it is important that we keep up to date on what's actually happening. And know enough about us to know that Thomas Massey's not actually our enemy. He's not actually someone who's trying to spike our guns right now.
One thing that gun owners have gotten their their heads around is how the political system works and how the court system works. I have a
Yeah.
friend, he hosts DLD After Dark, but he's
Mhm.
like, I've learned more about civics through the gun community than I have in my whole entire school career.
Yeah, so this is interesting because I think that not to overly simplify anything, but there's two camps. There's two camps here. There's people who do not simplify the system because they work in the system. But a lot of the people that work in the system don't actually want anything to happen. People who are advocates for gun rights want something to happen. And so they actually have to build a functional working knowledge of a thing as opposed to something that gets you paid and lets you work in an agency or a department or a bureau. And so I do feel like, in a lot of ways, the grassroots advocates have a much better understanding of how the system works than the people who are theoretically professionals employed by the system.
You're absolutely right. I've talked to several different staffers, and they said something that was totally wrong. I'm like, no, you better check on that because I don't think that's how it works. They're like, no,
Yeah.
we're sure how it works. I was like, can you get back to me on that? And they come back and they're like, yeah, you're right. That's not how it
Yeah.
works.
Yeah. So yeah, so I wanna thank everybody who is listening to the podcast, who is involved in pushing for the Hearing Protection Act, making sure that we didn't get a neutered, hamstrung, compromised version of it, that we got as much of it as we did, and to continue to push for just making that more robust and adding the short act to it as it goes through the Senate. We should have a big chunk of June in order to do this in. So, just block out the time. Make it a priority to lean on your senators to do this, because there's a lot of opportunity here. Again, like, I'm with Thomas Massey. There's a ton of stuff in this budget that I just do not like, but it is going to pass because they pass the budget every year, and we should not have bad gun law inside of this bill. We should take the opportunity to have some good gun law inside of this bill and get rid of some bad code.
Absolutely. Call your senators starting today.
Yeah. Start with the finance committee. Is it finance or is it tax committee? I forget.
Tax Finance Committee.
Okay, yeah. Start with them and work your way down. That's probably the best way to do it. So, yeah.
Most definitely.
Well, thank you so much, John. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. I really appreciate the work that you are doing in covering and educating and advocating in this area. Keep us posted if there is stuff that we can do to help you out. But everybody who's listening, yeah, keep an eye on his YouTube channel, or if you're more of a reader, AmmoLand has great coverage of this stuff. And John, I just really appreciate it. It's important work, and I think that you're a big part of why the needle has moved as far as it has.
Well, thank you for having me on. I appreciate you saying that.